Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So, we'll do some kirtan first, and then we can discuss the subject matter today, which is all about self-love. An interesting topic. So we'll sing maybe Jai Radha Madhava for a few minutes, and then we can engage in the conversation. And you play the thank you. Jai Okay, just say Mangalacharya briefly. Just a quick show of hands. Anyone here for the first time? Anyone? A few. So welcome. For those of you here for the first time, thank you for coming. We're just going to say a quick prayer. And the idea of this prayer is to offer respects to our teachers, those who have imparted this knowledge to us, and to ask for their blessings and their empowerment so that when we speak something, not only is it stimulating to the mind and the intelligence, but most importantly, it is able to pierce the heart and to help us to transform and to grow on our journey of life. So for those of you who know, you can join the prayer. For those who are here for the first time, don't worry, you can just hear it, still get the benefit, and then we'll get into discussion. Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sakana Raghunatam Gitam Tam Sajivam Sadavaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Gitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sumedhi Pranamami Haripriye
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. So I'll begin by saying what an honor it is to be with all of you again. Phil Crawley is like home away from home. So it's really wonderful to be here, to be present for the wonderful deities and all the devotees. And we also humbly request your mercy. So as we discuss this topic, which actually is a favorite topic of mine, one of the favorite topics, which was kindly suggested by Shyam Govinda. As we discuss this, I want us to consider it from a few different angles. As we said, these prayers we say at the beginning of class, asked to request blessings for transformation also. Because Krishna consciousness, it is a stimulation for the mind, but most importantly, it is food for the soul. Okay, so as we go through this presentation, I want to invite each and every one of us to think about this and think about what this means for us. Think about what this means for our association. Think about what this means for our community. And think about what this means for our entire spiritual institution. So we're here talking about, I'm not going to tell the title on the screen, but this is actually about self-love. We will also present as part of this a very powerful framework, which many of you will be familiar with from the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita, of the many things that it does, of the many gems, riches and treasures of the Bhagavad Gita, it provides certain what we call universal frameworks, because we all see life through a particular lens. And this universal framework, which is called the gunas, or the modes of material nature, allow us to even look at any subject and gain even deeper, powerful insight from that subject. We will also share a quote from a great personality, a great saint and a great acharya or teacher in our line, named Srila Bhakti Thakur. As Shyam Govinda was saying, my wife Bhakti Gamya studied medicine. She will also bring in something of an Ayurvedic insight. And the idea is, if we listen carefully as we discuss this topic, it can give us some very, very powerful and profound insights into ourselves, how we show up every day in our spiritual communities, how we show up every day in our workplace, in our private relationships, and some powerful tools for transformation. Perhaps the most thrilling thing on the spiritual journey is how we can change. And this topic is very close to my heart, because I remember being with my spiritual master, towards the end of his life on this planet. And he had been diagnosed with cancer, melanoma cancer. And one of his real concerns for all the spiritual communities that he interacted with was he was so concerned with noticing that even though we have such a powerful and potent spiritual process, he was concerned, and he's concerned with not seeing enough devotees grow and transform. So as we go through this, it's not a question of just getting knowledge. I want you to really tune into, what does this mean for me? How do some of these patterns, both positive and maybe things that we need to work on, how do they show up in my own life and character, in my own devotional service, and what can I do about it? Because the idea is, if we move in the right direction, we have some keys for transformation. And we're also going to talk about movies as well. Because Bhakti Gamya will share something about the narrative. It's very interesting. All movies, all good stories and novels, they follow a certain structure. And that structure actually has very deep spiritual meaning and spiritual roots as well. So we'll talk about that too. Okay, so The journey is indeed on. So first of all, the fact is we're all on the journey. We're all on the journey of spiritual growth and development. In fact, everyone's on the journey of growth. Even the person who doesn't necessarily believe in God or have a spiritual path or following or belief system, they're on the journey because it is the nature of the soul to want to improve. And if we can't get that through a spiritual avenue because we may not be aware of or have so much exposure to that, then people are always trying to elevate themselves in one way or another. So you'll notice someone wants to move to a more prestigious area, right? Or they want to get promoted in their job to move up, right? Or they want to follow a particular fitness plan so that they have a better health. There's always a natural inclination to elevate something, to bring something to a higher standard. And of course the perfection of that, according to the ancient Eastern teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Purana, the highest elevation is an elevation to what we call pure love of God. And the Sanskrit word for this is prema. And it's very, very interesting, this word. If you look at this word, prema, P-R-E-M-A, you can see that so many languages around the world are linked to this ancient Sanskrit language. So for instance, in the English language, when something is of the highest level, we say it's prime, right? Amazon Prime. Okay. Or we say premier, primary. If you look at the wording, and you'll see this across the globe, all languages, you'll see that there's an intimate relationship between those languages and the Sanskrit language. Our parents are from Ghana, spelled G-H-A-N-A. And one of the names of the Supreme Personality of God is what? It's Ganesha. Right? Gana means deep black. So again and again, as you study different cultures, languages, archaeology, you'll see that there is a very deep commonality that's there linguistically, archaeologically, etc. Anyway, let's get into the presentation. So, I'll hand over to Bhakti Gamya, who will speak about the story of you and how that relates to this subject.
Yeah, so this subject is actually also a very personal one. I started to look into this actually when I was at university. So what happened is I had a very close friend who helped me to actually come to Christian consciousness. But somehow this friendship was really taking a difficult turn. I remember chanting in a temple room. And sometimes, I know it doesn't happen to you guys, but I fell asleep during my japa. Does happen on here? I know for sure. So I fell asleep, and I think I was sitting next to the Prabhupada, I was at the manor, Bhakti was there, I was sort of, nodding off. And then the friend came over, he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, because he kind of introduced me to Krishna consciousness, and he said, you're making me look bad. And then I was like, oh, sorry. And then afterwards, after Japa period, he sort of took me aside and he said, it took blood, sweat and tears to make you a devotee. And just the way you're chanting on Japa, it just made me look so bad. I thought, okay. And I was just getting these kind of confusing thoughts and this kind of sense of like inner tension and turmoil. And then, and so these kind of things kept happening, and so I read this collection of essays by His Holiness Satchidananda Swami Maharaj, and one of those essays was actually about self-love, and it was the first time I'd come across this concept in a spiritual circle. I was still in my early 20s, early days of Christian consciousness. And I've been raised with a sort of mentality of like, you give and you give and you give, or if someone does something harsh to you, you just turn the other cheek. And so I just didn't really understand these things in the context of actually valuing yourself. And so again, when I came to Christian conscious spiritual life, I thought, humility is just, you don't think very much of yourself, you just continue to give and give and give. Nonetheless, I felt this kind of inner tension, this friendship was not making me feel so enthusiastic actually about my spiritual life. And so I've also been on this personal journey learning what does it mean to value ourselves as part of a spiritual community. what does it mean to maintain our own enthusiasm whilst understanding that we have to also be humble? What does humility mean? What does it look like? So I'm really excited to be sharing this with all of you. And so a lot of us, as I had this inner narrative actually. Somehow that I felt I'm not so important, everyone else is very important, and this is my inner narrative. And this inner narrative is kind of like an internal dialogue. It's like that voice that kind of pops up that speaks to us as we're going about our day. And this inner narrative, it actually completely kind of colours and influences our whole experience of life. Can you imagine having a friend who's saying to you, as you're trying to sort of make an offering, they're saying to you, this isn't very nice, this isn't very good, you could have done this a lot better, Krishna won't like this offering at all, like what did you do here, this is really horrible. Or you can have a friend who's saying, we tried our best and we'll let Krishna do the rest. And so it's so important that we actually take inventory and take stock of this inner voice, this internal narrative that we have. One of my passions, as was mentioned in the introduction, is writing, and so that's what I took to, and I found actually that in every story there's some kind of journey that the character goes on, like an inner journey, and I found actually there's lots of similarities between that inner journey and actually the journey in spiritual life. So at the beginning of the story, there'll often be the main character will hear a message, like something that they really need to learn. And usually they'll be like, I'm fine. And I'll just dismiss it. And then they'll be offered a kind of a choice to go on this kind of, some kind of adventure. And usually they'll say yes, because there's something they want to address within their own personal lives. And they'll be chasing really what I consider to be a kind of opulence. So we know that a name for Krishna is Bhagavan. You've all heard of this? And so Bhag means opulence, and Van means one who is full of. And actually in the Brahma Samhita, it said that the Supreme Lord of God is the one who possesses these opulences in full. And so there are these 6 kind of opulences, and we see that whenever anyone's said to be successful in this world, often they possess one or more of these opulences. So it'll be wealth. You've got magazines like Forbes magazine, or the top 50 wealthy people and top billionaires and so on and so forth. So you see that's one of these opulences actually, and actually Gaura Krishna is the most famous person, the wealthiest person. And so fame is another one. So obviously you can see that with social media that people have lots of likes or lots of views on their videos or whatever they're sharing on TikTok. That's seen as really, really successful, and people can launch careers. I was looking at one musician who, since he was 13 years old, he was on TikTok and he amassed tens of millions of views, and now he's making his own music just off the back of his TikTok platform. So that's one of these opulences as well, is fame, so wealth and fame. Also there's strength. If someone is said to be physically strong, every year we have, every 4 years there's the Olympics. They want to see who's the fastest runner or who's the best gymnast. And this is some kind of physical agility or strength. So this is also one of the opulences. And so there's also renunciation. So we can kind of sometimes see this in more spiritual circles. Today the party was kind enough to offer me some brownies to take home. And I was like, oh no, I don't need to take the brownies. No, it's fine. I was in my head, I was like, take the brownies. Take the brownies. Then it's no, I'm just please give me some. So initially I was thinking, I should, show some kind of renunciation, right? Don't. Anyone else see brownies, just take them. As long as I to Krishna and in a kosher, take them. So that's what, so in spiritual circles sometimes we're thinking, we should seem to be renounced, seem to be detached, and that's one kind of quality, but Krishna possesses that to the highest degree. He's completely detached from the material world, like completely detached. And also there's wisdom as well. So the smartest, most intelligent person there seems to be very respectable. And also beauty, the beauty pageants, like models, they also seem to be incredibly successful. So there are these 6 kind of opulences, and we see that people in the world who have these 6 opulences, they're very much respected. And I was also seeing that in terms of my study of stories, that often the person goes on a kind of a journey in order to gain more of one of these opulences. Maybe they're looking for wealth, maybe they need some money to achieve a particular goal. It might be that they want to seem like much more intelligent and so on and so forth. So different stories, they'll be chasing some kind of opulence. And so what will happen in the story is that they'll seem to gain more of this opulence. People start to respect them, and they'll seem to be like, they'll seem to become more intelligent or more wealthy or more like just like kind of seem to be a bit more stronger or more physically agile. And then what happens is there's a turning point, and they ignore the warning signs, and suddenly this opulence starts to just kind of completely be depleted from their lives. And then they hit rock bottom where they don't have any of this opulence at all. And that's at the moment that they can recall the message that they heard in the beginning, which is actually, you don't need this at all. You don't need to place any kind of condition on your worth. And so I see that this opulence is kind of like having a ruler. It's kind of like having a ruler and saying to yourself, imagine looking in the mirror each day and holding this kind of ruler and saying, the more beautiful I am, the more valuable I am. So today I think I'm this beautiful, I've got so much makeup or so much, I've done my hair in this kind of way, so therefore I'm more valuable. And we see it, maybe we feel a little bit more confident that day. And the next day you might have, a terrible hair day. So don't worry, I will make this more relevant to you guys, okay? But the next day you might have like a terrible hair day or a bad haircut. And then we think, we feel a bit bad about ourselves. We feel like, we don't really feel at our best. And that, to some extent, we can appreciate as part of day-to-day life, but it can get to a state at which we really start to devalue ourselves just based on something external. And so that can be there with any of these opulences. Today I think, I did really well in my test, my exam. I'm doing okay. Or we think, I didn't do so well in my exam today. I'm a lousy human being. I used to, like my husband said, I study medicine. And so one of the interesting things about that is that you then start classes where everyone is like really smart. And then so you used to think, I'm kind of smart, and then you feel like, I'm just really average. and we used to have, ward rounds where the consultants would just like do pop quizzes, and they would just ask us questions on the spot. And as you can imagine, medicine is a massive subject. So often I just stand there going, and you start to feel pretty stupid, which is unfortunate. But and if we've learnt to value ourselves based upon that, you can actually start to feel quite bad about yourself. So what we want to do actually is we want to just understand that our value, there's no condition to it. Actually, we must have heard it so many times that we're conditioned souls. So we start to actually see ourselves with respect to the material energy. And part of that will be a manifestation of what we're talking about today, which is placing some external value on our self-worth. But actually what we want to do is want to throw away the ruler altogether and understand, no, I'm unconditionally important because I'm part and parcel of Krishna. And there's no value there's no monetary or limited value you can place in that, because by nature it's spiritual, it's completely unlimited. So I found that as I was, I'm still on this journey, this is something I'm still learning, but I'm finding that it's brought so much more openness to my spiritual life. Before, I wasn't really planning even to participate in this talk actually, which like a minute before. And previously I would have thought, oh my god, where are my notes, notes. Have I studied enough? And I wouldn't have felt, I could just sit here and try to do some of the service. But I thought today, it's okay, let's see what I can remember. If not, my husband will chip in. I just thought, let's just try and do service. So I feel like life opens up so much more when we can just, disregard the ruler, throw the ruler, and understand that I'm unconditionally loved and accepted by the Supreme Lord. So, let me try and do a little bit, let me do my best, and let Krishna do the rest. Yeah, so where does it come from? Where do we start with this story, this sense of, I am valuable if? How do we start this sentence? A few years ago, my husband and I were doing a seminar on parenting, like spiritual parenting, and we came across some really interesting research actually in Ayurveda, and I was explaining exactly how a child learns to what the 4 things that make up a child's kind of baseline mentality, baseline way that they think. And one of those things was actually the experience they have when they're in the womb. And that really informs their mentality afterwards. So what's the ideal, is what's meant to be, is that when the child's in the womb, there's 9 months of a very calm, relaxed, peaceful mother. There's lots of loving family members, and she feels very, very loved and cared for and nourished. And the reason that's so much encouraged in Ayurveda, obviously it's wonderful to have it anyway, one of the reasons it's really encouraged is because it's not just the mother who's receiving all that love and attention, it's also the child in the womb. And we know that even in Srimad Bhagavatam, we know that Sukadeva Goswami, he heard a synopsis of the Srimad Bhagavatam when he was in the womb. And so when delivered by his father Vyasadeva, so when he came out, that also gave him a real taste for the hearing the Bhagavatam, then he heard the whole Bhagavatam from Vyasadeva eventually, and he was able to recite that to Maharaj Parikshit. So really, the experience we have in the womb, it really gives us, it really influences how we are, when we're eventually born. So that's one of the things that directs our mentality. And also, just as a connection to that, the caretakers that we have in our lives, they also show us how we can value ourselves. So when we're really young, we don't know that we're actually inherently valuable, but we learn that by the amount of attention we receive from our caregivers. So if our caregivers gives us attention, then we think, oh, I'm worthy of attention. If they don't give us attention, then we don't think we're worthy of attention. And so as our caregivers give us attention, they also start to notice certain qualities about ourselves. As they notice these qualities, they're meant to feed it back to us, and we notice, oh, this is what I'm naturally talented at, this is what I'm skilled at, maybe this is a service that I can do in the world. So really, our caregivers, they're the ones who actually inspire us to learn that we're inherently valuable. Then when we get a bit older, then we start to receive training from our caregivers, and that inherent sense of value begins to be molded. So we learn, 1, I'm inherently valuable, and then we start to learn that other people are valuable too. And that's where we get that balance in terms of self-esteem, because self-esteem doesn't just mean I value myself, but it means I value everyone, all selves. And so that's the balance. That's really what we want to talk about today. Yeah, so we felt that the self-esteem, we like our models. In our household, we like our models. So we felt that self-esteem, it's almost something you could you could kind of put on a, I don't want to say graph, I don't know. You can draw it like we have on this slide here. So in one sense, we can think, we can recognise in the middle is the balance, that I'm valuable and everyone else is also valuable. And therefore, we get really balanced, we get balanced relationships. We get a sense of wholesomeness because we think, I'm important, but so is this other person. My opinion's significant, so is theirs. See, it's that balance. Because actually, we express ourselves when we're in relationship with others, actually. So that's also why self-esteem for ourselves and for others is inherently connected. And so on one end of the spectrum is this kind of meditation of Other people are important. I'm not so important, but other people are important. And so therefore, going back to our previous example that we started the talk with, when my friend was saying, you know, you're embarrassing me with your japa, I just had a vague sense that something was a bit off, but I just I didn't really address the behaviour at all. I was just so much emphasised on how other people were thinking, other people's opinions, and so I just didn't really regard in myself how to address this like niggling feeling. And I remember it was actually until once my husband and I we were in the car with this person, and he had an orange, and he just put the orange in my hands, like peel it, just put it in my hands, and I was like, okay, you know, again this sense of something is off here. I didn't really address it, and afterwards my husband said that wasn't right. That's not a healthy interaction, and you shouldn't be tolerating that. And so sometimes this is what happens when we overemphasize other people are valuable and we don't recognize our own value. I've learned to ignore or suppress that inner sense in me that I'm feeling uncomfortable. On the other end of the spectrum is considering that I'm valuable, more valuable than other people. And sometimes it's when I was saying it's very kind of like gross way, but sometimes it might be, if you go back to the ruler example, we might think, okay, I'm valuable because maybe I've got this much money, for example, and this person has got less money. And therefore, and it's not a massively conscious thing, it can be a little bit less conscious, but we can think, maybe in a conversation, we talk over that person if they offer their opinion on something. Maybe we give them less time because we just don't think it's worthwhile because, hey, you know, I've got better things to do with my time. It can become a little bit subtle like that. And so what we want to do is we want to again like find that balance, which is what we're going to talk a bit more about today. And so, just as a preliminary exercise or introduction into understanding what is our inner dialogue, what is our internal narrative, we can just on one regular day in our life, just kind of take notes of our thoughts in that day. You know, maybe you can open the notes app on our phone, or you know, if we're a little bit old school, have a piece of paper. No offense. I'm just joking. I like my paper as well. So you have to take like a piece of paper and just write down, take a note of, what do I think when I get up? What are my thoughts if no one's around, no one's speaking to me? What are my triggers? If I'm starting to feel negative about myself, just write this thought down. What happened when I start to think negatively about this? If you just do this for a few regular days in our life, we can get a sense of where our internal dialogue is at. And that's a really good starting point for addressing our self-esteem and making it better. Yeah. Okay. So I think would you like to talk a bit more stuff?
Sure. So, to this point also, if we look at it in terms of the Bhagavad Gita, we mentioned earlier about this framework. So in the Bhagavad Gita, which is an ancient dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, Krishna introduces or speaks to Arjuna about a particular way of considering and categorizing the world. So he says, Sattvam Rajastama iti gune prakriti sambhava nebanati mahabaho dehi dehinam avyayam. Sattvam Rajastama. Sattva, the mode of goodness; Rajas, the mode of passion; Tama, the mode of ignorance. So to this particular model, when we put the lens of scripture on this concept of self-esteem, then actually we'll do this together. We can understand that when someone feels that they are better than other people, their self-esteem is in the mode of what? Passion, right? A superiority complex. I am valuable, you're not. So with passion, that sense of wanting to dominate, control, rule it over. If someone feels that actually everyone is more valuable than me, then it means that their self-esteem is influenced by the mode of ignorance. Okay? You see how it works? Very, very clear. That framework means because the self-esteem is influenced by the mode of ignorance, I feel inferior. An inferiority complex. Interestingly, there was a research that was done. I think they asked either criminals or psychopaths, they asked them, how do you determine who you attack? There's a study that was done on this. And what they found was people who had psychopathic, which means antisocial tendencies, they were able to pick up by a person's body language. They were able to pick up those people who had low self-esteem, who would be more vulnerable targets, you see? So this topic is so important because our inner dialogue, it's not just going on inside us, it has so many subtle effects on how we show up in the world. Tone of voice, what we say, what we do, so many things. So we know that when people feel they're better than others, that means their self-esteem is influenced by passion. When people have an inferiority complex, I'm inferior to others, their self-esteem is influenced by ignorance. Therefore, the third way, the middle way, I'm valuable, other people are valuable, that means self-esteem in the mode of goodness. Interestingly enough, in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, there's a conversation between Krishna and Uddhava. And Krishna is explaining to Uddhava that for progress one has in spiritual life, one first practices devotional service in the mode of goodness, and then from practicing devotional service in the mode of goodness, one becomes completely transcendental. So this understanding about the modes is really, really important. And it's about really understanding that self-esteem in the mode of goodness is favorable for spiritual advancement. Just adding one point from something Bhakti Gamya said earlier, they now know in modern science that when the child is in the womb, the child has certain brain waves. They're able to measure the different types of brain waves. When the child is in the womb, and also the first 5 years of the child's life, the brain waves are such that the child is deeply impressionable. And this is also why I found it such an interesting topic. You see, whether it's in a spiritual community or in a workplace, a corporate company, if people do not have healthy self-esteem, it can manifest in so many unhealthy behaviors. So think about it. If someone's self-esteem is in the mode of passion, let's say in a spiritual community, what kind of behaviors do you think they'll start to show? Any ideas? You have someone in the community whose self-esteem is in the mode of passion, what do you think they'll be doing? Yeah.
Trying to dominate more.
Exactly. Trying to dominate. What else will they be doing? Self-esteem in the mode of passion, yes. Fanatical, yeah, right? Everything's over the top, trying to push everyone around. Anything else? Self-esteem in the mode of passion?
Exploitation.
Absolutely exploitation. And you know what happens? If I'm better than you, it's all right. I've got every right to tell you what to do, push you around, control you, manipulate you. And of course, it ultimately leads to some real lack of advancement for the person. So this topic has really powerful meaning in spiritual life. Yeah, do you want to add something?
So this slide is just basically giving symptoms of different points on the spectrum. So just elaborating on what my husband so wonderfully said, that if we think others are more valuable than me, then you can read off the side, there may be tendencies for self-neglect. I remember we were in one community, and there was one devotee who was this really amazing, very, 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 you can say Pujari, or she really followed all the rules to the T, but she did it to the extent that it was actually affecting her health. She wasn't taking enough sleep, she wasn't eating enough, because she was just so much focused on serving the deities. And other devotees were noticing in the community and saying, maybe you should take care of yourself. And she said, no. And in the end, she ended up being admitted to hospital of some sort of this illness, and it meant that obviously she, unfortunately, she also wasn't able to do her service anymore. And so we can also meditate that if we take care of ourselves, and will enable us to be consistent and more happy and more joyfully perform our devotional service. And devotional service is meant to be joyfully performed, actually. So we may also experience some frustration. Like in the example I gave, that friend was being overbearing, and I was frustrated there. There's that suppression of those emotions that we're feeling, that inattention, and that builds up to frustration and irritation. We may also only feel good about ourselves when we've done some kind of external thing. You know, we may only feel good about ourselves if we happened to, distribute, 20 books that day, but the rest of the time we just don't feel good about ourselves. So, we can also maybe send out the slides afterwards. Yeah, but there's more points, but I think maybe we need to move on because we've got quite a few slides.
So let's look at this now through the lens of a statement by one of our great acharyas. Acharya means great saints. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there's a prayer called the prayer for a lover of God. He actually states, let me also love myself when I'm inclined towards Krishna so that I may attain devotion for him. Sometimes people think that self-esteem or self-love is a kind of new age concept, but actually our acharyas actually have written about them. You see, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Amai vamso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manashishtanindriyani prakritishtani kashati. So he says the living entities are amsa. In the translation for this, amsa means part and parcel. Amai vamsa jiva loke. But he says also they're struggling kashati with what? Mana, Shishtani, Indriyani. Mana means mind, Shishtani means six, Indriyani means the senses. For the living entities, everyone in the world is struggling with the mind and the senses. But we're part and parcel of Krishna. So because we're part and parcel of Krishna, there's a very beautiful paradox that every devotee should be aware of. When we read the writings of great acharyas, it's easy to project our own mentality onto them in a wrong way. So we may read in some of the great writings of great devotees of the Lord about how they feel insignificant. And then the devotee may think, in order to be humble, I should feel like I'm useless, worthless, etc. Now, a very, very interesting thing to understand about this, and that is that when such great devotees are expressing how insignificant they feel, if you study their writings very carefully, they feel insignificant, but in a very specific type of way. It is not the insignificance of low self-esteem. It is not the insignificance, going back, of feeling that others are valuable and I'm not valuable. It's a very important thing to understand, and a very beautiful way of understanding it is through the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is written by who? Rupa Goswami. First 1.3.35, there's a prayer there. And the prayer begins, Na prema shravanadi bhakti apiva. So Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says, I do not have love of Godhead, na prema. Right? Nor do I have love for the process of hearing and chanting shravanadi bhakti. Right? Then he goes on to say, I don't have a high birth, knowledge, mystic perfection. He says, because you, dear Lord, you give your mercy to the most fallen. He says, I have this unbreakable hope, which is always in my heart. He says, this hope is always giving me pain. So I just want to break this down to really understand. So he's talking about how I don't have all of these things. I've got so many disqualifications. But because you, Lord, because you, Krishna, because the Supreme Lord, you give your mercy to the most fallen, I'm always hopeful. So when we see this, if we put these things together, we can understand a crucial distinction between spiritual humility and low self-esteem. Right? So Rupa Goswami is saying, I have so many, there's so many things I don't have, but you give your mercy to the most fallen, so I'm always hopeful. So when there's spiritual humility, is the person active or inactive? They're active. I always have this hope, right? I always feel that I can achieve the goal. So let's break this down again. So the difference between low self-esteem and spiritual humility will be a difference in the modes of material nature. Think about this carefully. If there's spiritual humility, what did we say? The person's aware of how great God is. Some of us, you have a good job, right? You're earning a certain salary, and you're thinking, I'm doing okay. And then you meet someone who's a billionaire, and you think, well, okay. All right, okay, you understand. But you see, this is an important thing. It's the contrast. When the great devotees are talking about how wonderful and how, when they talk about how insignificant they are, it's because they are experiencing the greatness of who? Of Krishna. It's like having a flame in your hand before the sun, right? The flame gives a little bit of light, but you can't compare it to the sun. So when they feel insignificant, they are feeling insignificant in relation to the greatness of Krishna that they're experiencing. But that's part one. Part two is equally important. Think about it. So I feel insignificant because I see how great this person is. Now, it doesn't stop there. At the same time, because this person is so great and they love me, and they want me to be successful. So I see this billionaire has so much money. I feel like, wow, they've got much more money than me. But I also know that they're my friend, and they want me to be successful. So I feel simultaneously very humble because of how great they are. And at the same time, I feel very valued, very confident, and very enthusiastic because I also know how much they love me. So think about this. When there's spiritual humility, the person's active, the person also feels what? They feel valued and loved. Right? So if you look at it, the symptoms of spiritual humility are also related to the symptoms of goodness. But when someone just feels, I'm insignificant, I'm useless, I can't do anything, are they active or inactive? Inactive. They feel like, why should I even bother trying? It's never going to work, I can't do it anyway, I'm useless. And therefore, that mood of low self-esteem, it has the symptoms of what mode? The mode of ignorance. That's the difference between spiritual humility and low self-esteem. When there's spiritual humility, it has the qualities of goodness, enthusiasm, awareness. I'm aware of how great Krishna is, but I'm also aware of how much he loves me, how much he wants me to be successful. Therefore, I can try anything because I'm backed up by the supreme personality of Godhead. So this is how anyone can see, am I actually dealing with real spiritual humility, or without meaning to, am I actually developing low self-esteem? And it's one thing. Am I actively enthusiastic and confident because I feel I'm backed up by the Supreme Lord himself? Or am I despondent, disenthused, thinking I can't do anything because actually I don't really understand how much that same Supreme Lord actually loves and cares about me? So this is how you can very easily distinguish the two.
Yeah, this is summed up really nicely. I think it's by Bhakti Maharaj who said that humility doesn't mean to think less of oneself, but to think of oneself less.
Yeah. So the idea is, this is interesting also to your point, when there's real spiritual humility, the sign of proper healthy self-esteem in spiritual life is that you're not always thinking about what you have or what you don't have. You see? Interestingly enough, the sign of really healthy self-esteem is that you're not absorbed in your own self. Healthy self-esteem frees the consciousness to focus on the well-being of others and the service of the Lord. You see? And this is really important. This model that we came up with, I think it was really Bhakti Gamya's model. But when you look at this point, I'm valuable and so is everyone else, it's a very important distinction about spiritual self-love. If you go out into the world, if you go onto online, if you go onto Instagram, you'll see many people have different concepts of self-love. And the difficulty with the 99.9% of concepts out there about self-love is it's only focused on what the person feels about themselves. So in the name of self-love, what can happen is you can have lots of narcissism, and then people will say, I love myself, I just do whatever I want, I don't care about other people. But it's an irony because no person is an island. It is part of the inherent need of every living entity to have healthy relationships. So this is something I learned when I was looking at this topic. You see, what we think about ourselves, it's a blueprint for how we're going to relate to other people. If I've got healthy self-esteem, that means I'm valuable and other people are valuable. How will I deal with other people? What do you think? How will it affect the way I deal with other people? Any ideas? Yeah, mutual respect. I respect myself and I respect them. And again, for those of you who are familiar with this concept, the mode of goodness, it creates outcomes which are what? Outcomes which are sustainable. You see, Vishnu resides over the mode of goodness, which means maintenance. Lord Shiva resides over the mode of passion, which is which leads to? Sorry, ignorance, which is destruction. So if someone feels that others are more valuable than them, it will have negative impacts or repercussions in their life. If someone feels that they're better than other people, Krishna says activities in the mode of passion, they begin like nectar and they end like poison. So when people have self-esteem in the mode of passion, I'm better than other people, in the short term, they may push people around. But when people get tired of being pushed around, what do people do? They just leave them alone. So it begins like nectar, I can control everyone, but everyone just says, you know what, I just can't be around this person anymore. They're too pushy, they're too controlling, and then people just leave them. You see? So it exactly follows the trajectory of the modes of material nature as given by the Bhagavad Gita. So we share this quote by Bhakti Thakur. We also understand this point from some verses in the Bhagavad Gita. So Krishna makes this point. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision, samadarshana, that's the Sanskrit. They see with equal vision. And this is also interesting because this is also what happens when there's healthy self-esteem. You see with equal vision, equally valuable. The learned, the humble, they understand by virtue of true knowledge. So when there's true knowledge, it also manifests in healthy self-esteem. You're valuable, I'm valuable. I'm not going to encroach on your healthy space, and I will respect also my healthy needs as well. Like that. It doesn't mean I'm not open to feedback. It doesn't mean I can't have dialogue. You see, actually the irony is, the more secure a person is, the more they are able to receive and hear feedback, and rather than being triggered, they're just looking at, is it true? Is it true? And to the extent that it's true, I will be able to utilize that and to grow.
Yeah, just on that, in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the purports, so the Prabhupada says that humility means truthfulness.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and he says also humility, in another purport in the Bhagavad Gita, he says humility means being free of the desire to be respected by others. So if my whole life is all about being respected by others, it means my self-esteem is also influenced by the mode of passion. Because it's all about how I look, right? How people see me. And it becomes a trap for that reason. There's another verse. See, we can understand how to see ourselves by understanding how Krishna sees us. This verse, Bhagavad Gita 9:29, Krishna says, Samoham sarva bhuteshu. I'm equal, kind, merciful to everyone. I'm impartial. That means he's just as much ready to give, to bring you back home, back to Godhead, as any other living entity. There's no one who's favored more than others. It doesn't matter background, age, gender, makes no difference. He's equal to everyone. And at the same time, this is also a very powerful law of relationship. At the same time, he reciprocates based upon what you do. So someone says, Krishna's taken more steps towards this person than me. And then you look into it and you find, yeah, because that person took 5 steps towards Krishna, you took 1 step. So you can say it's different, but it's actually the same. It's the same ratio. You see, it's the same ratio. You take a step towards Krishna, he takes 10 million steps towards you. So this person takes 5 steps towards Krishna, he takes how many? 5 million. And so, oh, he's unfair. No, it's not unfair. He's reciprocating what the person did. And if you wanted to do the same thing, he would reciprocate with you just as much. Right? This is the point. Envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I'm equal to all. But, and this is the law of relationships, whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend to them. It's the same thing that we experience every day. You have many people in the community that you know. Someone goes out of the way for you, right? And it's like, wow, they brought me food to my house. They didn't need to do that. It's a human law that you naturally want to reciprocate. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean we're partial. It means we're reciprocal. We're responding to what the person does. Someone shows you extra attention and extra care, it inspires a natural response. Oh, they really care about me. I'll show up differently. So this is what we're having with Krishna throughout our spiritual lives. Did you want to say something on this?
I don't have my glasses
on. So this is really an elaboration on what to do when dealing with people who have basically self-esteem in the mode of ignorance. Some of the qualities, they're self-interested. Sometimes you see this in communities. People have their own agenda, argumentative, aggressive, always trying to get attention, manipulative, or trying to charm, but charm for the sake of getting something, having an agenda. So he explains some things to do. I guess we'll put it in a nutshell, because I also want to open up for questions before we close. And that is, the key thing is, this is interesting, the key thing is, it's not about what other people are. Primarily, it's about who? It's about us. It's about what we are. You see, sometimes, going back to what we said about these psychopaths and who they attack, they actually pick up something of the energy of the individual. And therefore, they reciprocate based upon that. So one of the most powerful things about spiritual knowledge is it changes our orientation. The orientation of most people in the world is that if everyone else just changed, I'll be fine. The spiritual paradigm is the opposite. The spiritual paradigm is, if I actually change, I'll be fine. And what is that change? It is that, I don't want to say deep work. It is that it is the retrieval of the deep treasure of our original spiritual nature. Think about that carefully. We're not trying to become something. There's a saying, the perfection is not when there is no more to add. Perfection is when there is no more to take away. So the idea is that we are all Jiva Sarupaya Krishnera Nitya Das. We're all an eternal servant of Krishna by nature. Everyone, even the most hardcore atheists, they're an eternal servant of Krishna. It's just that it's covered over, it's been forgotten. So our process is a process of removing everything that is artificial, everything that's unnatural, so that our original nature is once again manifest. And so this key point is that don't worry so much about what other people are. If I've got healthy self-esteem, then people can't encroach on my healthy space. If I have healthy self-esteem, I will naturally have healthy boundaries. If I have healthy self-esteem, I will naturally notice if something is not quite right. If I have healthy self-esteem, I will even energetically, this is really important, on an energetic level, if I have healthy self-esteem, it will actually repel people who are manipulative, because they'll feel, oh, this person, we're not going to be able to take advantage of him. There's something about the person's energy, it's just like, no, that's not going to work. You see? It's very, very powerful. And it's the principle of spiritual life. The principle of spiritual life is that our hearts are like a lab. If we do the work inside the consciousness of ourselves, if we work on our consciousness, automatically it has ripple effects on everything else. The way I speak, the way I think, the way I feel, what I do with my time, how I relate to people, all of it. It is therefore the most powerful form of of self-development. Spiritual life is the most powerful and most potent, most effective and most efficient form of lifestyle transformation, because if you transform the consciousness, everything else automatically adjusts. So, this is also important. The essence is how to deal with someone who has low self-esteem. The key thing actually is to deal with yourself in the way that Krishna would deal with you. Right? It's really important. It's to deal with ourselves in the way that we would be dealt with by Krishna. If you make a mistake, do you think Krishna will just destroy you? No. You're part and parcel of him. He would lovingly encourage you. Okay, let's learn from this. Let's grow together. Right? So the true key point here is we have to develop a healthy internal dialogue. This is also why hearing good classes and reading the scriptures is so important, because if we read with receptivity, you absorb those same patterns that you read in the verses, right? That Krishna is impartial. That means he cares about you as much as everyone else. Equal vision. He's compassionate, karuna, right? What is that verse? There's many verses which talk about Krishna's compassionate nature, Lord Chaitanya's compassionate nature, the compassionate nature of the pure devotees. To the extent that we internalize that, to that extent we show up in the world in a different way. So, some ways of developing healthy self-esteem which is favorable for spiritual life. Number one, being attentive to your needs, not your wants, but your needs. Like taking care of your needs consistently. Okay? Number two, being kind to yourself in word, thought, and deed. There's a very wonderful little quote that I saw in my spiritual master's house in Gita Nagari. And in the quote it says, a friend is someone who understands the journey you've been on, accepts you as you are, and yet still lovingly invites you to grow. So think about these three things. They understanding, that's empathy. I understand where you're coming from, right? You may even shop, like you have a bad day, you're a bit snappy, irritable, but I understand where you're coming from. I understand why you're showing up the way you are. So that's empathy. Understands you as, understands the journey you've been on. Accepts you as you are. So there's a sense that you're always valuable. Unconditional acceptance. But it doesn't stop there, because often people think, oh, I'm just going to be myself and then I can be rude or harsh. No. Understands the journey you've been on, accepts you as you are, and all three things, and yet still lovingly invites you to grow. So it's not that I'm okay. No, we could get better, right? We do some things correct, there's some things that we don't do that's so good. Let's see how we can encourage and inspire each other to move forward. If these three ingredients are there, you have the formula for very healthy growth. It's also recognizing and acting on your good intentions. This is very interesting. We tend to judge others by their behavior, and we judge ourselves by our intentions. You see? And also another thing that happens is when someone does something wrong, we tend to think that's characteristic of them. And when we do something wrong, we think it's situational. Oh, I had a bad night's sleep, that's why I snapped at that person. Normally I'm a wonderful person, really, you understand. But if they do something wrong, they're always like that. Right? And I've seen them for years, that's how they are. So these subtle things go on, right? Characteristic versus situational. How we see ourselves, how we see others, how we judge others. And the insidious thing is, oftentimes we're not even aware that this is going on. These things often run beneath the level of our conscious awareness. We have to be conscious. We have to have positive practices which support our goals and lifestyle. We want to be Krishna conscious, we want to grow spiritually. We should think, how do I set up my life to support that particular goal?
I'll just add that also these steps also mimic if we have a healthy caretaker who's attentive to the child, is kind to the child, notices their good intentions, even if not fully able to carry it through. They respond to that, they reinforce that with their words, and also encourage the child to put in place positive practices in their life. So we're just really doing that kind of thing ourselves.
Yeah, and this is really important. There's a very interesting Memories of Prabhupada. You can find it online. It's episode number 67. And Prabhupada talks about how to make sure that the child has very strong confidence. He says something very interesting. This is also a principle given in Ayurveda. He says when the child is young, and that means 0 to 5, he said you never tell the child no. Right? Now it seems really weird. It's like, how are you going to do that? They're going to do all kinds of things. He said if they do something that they're not meant to be doing, he said you distract them away from it. But then in that DVD, he explained why. He said if you do that, that child will become the adult who's got very, very strong confidence. So let's just explain how this works. When between the ages of 0 to 5, according to Ayurveda and modern science, you can look this up now, they've also come to the same conclusion. The child brainwaves, the adults have what's called beta brainwaves, which means you're conscious and alert. Okay, so you say someone says something to you, you think, am I going to do it or am I not? You're kind of on alert to decide to discriminate. Children, when they're very young, their brainwaves don't go to beta up until a certain age. So what's happening is whatever they experience, two things. One, it leaves an impression which forms the basis of their subconscious mind. So 0 to 5, and also while they're in the womb, you're literally creating their subconscious mind. And just like the iceberg, we know that most of the iceberg is beneath the surface. Same thing with the subconscious mind. That's why right now in the world, oftentimes when you tell people something, they can take offense very easily because their sensitivity, because they already have negative samskars. So you have all these political and cultural conflicts which are going on, and it's because people already have an insecurity. So when you said something to them, they take it personally. It's like, that wasn't even personal, I was just making a comment. No, you're saying that there's something wrong with me. It's actually because that same mentality which is not developed from childhood. You see? So 0 to 5, what happened? Prabhupada says 0 to 5, he quotes Chanakya, he says 0 to 5 you treat them like a? Anyone know that quote from Prabhupada? Yeah, like a prince. 5 to 15, you, yeah, oh, princess, yes. Yeah, good point. He says 5 to 15, you treat them like a? Servant. right? And 16 onwards, you treat them like a friend. Yeah, and that statement mirrors what's there in Ayurveda.
So, explain the sermon.
Yeah. So what happens is, when the child is given unconditional love between the ages of 0 to 5, it establishes at the deepest level of their consciousness that you are unconditionally and inherently valuable. 0 to 5. Then, when that's built, on the basis of that unconditional value, 5 to 15 you treat them as a servant. What that means is you train them to be responsible. You see? And what that teaches them is 0 to 5 taught you that you're inherently valuable. 5 to 15, where you're serving other people, teaches you that other people are valuable. So what you're doing in a sequence is you're first showing them 0 to 5, you have rights. You have inherent rights. 5 to 15, you're teaching them you have responsibilities as well. You see? And then 16, you treat them like a friend. I had a very interesting experience. I was working in one company, and there was one lady who worked there. Her name was Lily. And she just kept talking about how she has such a great relationship with her dad. And I was thinking, this is kind of unusual, to be honest with you. And I thought, that I was reading all this stuff at the time. I thought, let me just check. I'm curious just to see if this plays out. So I said to her, so tell me about, how come you have such a good relationship with your dad? Because she said that I tell my dad everything. Right? I don't hide anything from him. We have such a great relationship, I can be completely transparent. And I didn't even ask her about this, but I just said generally, tell me about this. And then what she started to talk about was about how when she was in her teens, mid-teens, her dad just treated her like a friend. And I thought, that's exactly what Prabhupada said. And she said because her dad treated her like a friend, rather than talking down to her, like, because sometimes you see that, parents don't mean to, but sometimes you're like 50 years old, it's like, they're still talking about your like, little boy, it's like, Mom, what's going on here? Hello, like that. So he said, he speaks to me like a friend. And she said, because he speaks to me like a friend, I'm just very open with him. Now, of course, that doesn't mean he doesn't be like a senior friend, like an older friend, still offer advice and so on, but it's that mood. And so these points, they're in Ayurveda. It's actually there's a section it's called the Charaka Samhita. It's in Ayurveda literature, and in the Charaka Samhita there's a section called the Kaumara, which is child psychology and pediatrics. So this is an ancient science. It's been known for thousands of years. Thousands of years. We found this article in the Hope This Meets You in Good Health, ISKCON magazine. And this article talks about some of these particular points in that article. And that's a side point. So, yeah, I think we're almost at the end. Okay, good. So I'll leave a few minutes for questions and we will need to leave quite swiftly. So, how to stay balanced. Remembering some of these key truths of our teachings. Life is temporary, okay? So we have to understand that we have a short period of time in this world and we want to transform the temporary into the eternal. Yeah? That means engaging in devotional service so that even though we have a temporary time in this world, we can use that time in such a way that we can gain an eternal benefit. Okay? And if we practice, people sometimes see detachment and they think, oh, how are we going to do that? It's something that you cultivate. You see? If you practice anything, the reason why you have certain skills and habits right now is because you practiced them. It didn't just come out of nowhere. So in the same way, if we practice detachment from external results, that doesn't mean we don't do our best. It means we do our best, always. But we understand that whatever the outcome, that's not down to me. I heard a class by Prabhupada, because if you listen to Prabhupada's classes, it's really important, because he gives all kinds of extra analogies and examples which make it very easy to understand what he's talking about. So he gave an example related to this. He said, it's just like you work in a company. Right? So I work in investment banking, right? So they make a lot of money. But the idea is that if you work in a company and you have this mood of detachment, it means your job is just to do your duty in the company. Right? And you know that whether the company does well one year or doesn't do well, you're still going to get paid either way. Prabhupada said that's detachment. It's the understanding that don't worry about the outcome of the company, just worry about, are you doing your job properly in the company? You see? And if you have that mentality, that's how you can understand this sense of detachment. Avoid envy and jealousy. Practice appreciation. So the modes, Krishna says the modes vie for supremacy. So we can consciously invoke a particular mode by what we practice. You see? So if I practice finding the good in people, if I practice appreciating people, if I practice being objective actually, impartiality and objectivity are symptoms of the mode of goodness, because you're just seeing the truth. Now, if I see the truth and it's not good, but I have compassion, then it's just like a doctor. I see that someone has some disease, but a good doctor you don't go to a good doctor, they see that you've got an illness, like, oh my God, it's disgusting, you've got an illness, get out of here. You think that's a crazy doctor, what kind of doctor is that? But they don't close their eyes and pretend that you're not ill. That's also a bad doctor. A bad doctor is also, there's an illness, but I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. Right, how's that going to help everyone? The good doctor is able to be truthful and compassionate. I see the illness, I see the good, I see this area of your health is very good. I see this area has some issue, but where it has an issue, I want to help. It's not a question that we're not expecting anyone to be perfect, but what we want to do is where there's an issue, we want to see how can I help. You see, often people think I'm a good person because I don't see anything. Actually, that means that your love is very shallow. Where there's deep love, I want to understand the quality of someone so I can serve them. So the issue isn't seeing whether someone is perfect or not. The issue is that we don't have the compassion when we see something that could be improved to feel some compassion. It must be difficult having that challenge. It must be difficult having those habits. It must be difficult having that kind of consciousness. How can I help this person? And sometimes the best way to help them is to pray for them. Sometimes the best way to help them is just be a good example yourself. You see? So it's not a problem that people are not perfect. That's not the problem. The problem is that we don't have compassion. That's the problem. Our compassion is weak. That's the real issue. That's why in the so-called name of being nice, we try and close our eyes and pretend things aren't there. Because if we had real compassion, you'd be like, I see it, I love them, and I want to help them to come beyond that, to come up to a higher level. So, practice appreciation. The world is full of dualities, just understanding that there are also always two sides of the same coin. Sometimes people want to be famous. And sometimes they don't really, you can tell what's going on in the person's mind. Sometimes the person wants to be famous, and you can see that there's some attachment, because when you're attached to something, a sign that you're attached to something is you will never be able to see it fully. So let's just do this as an experiment. So, if someone wants to be famous, right, what do they think will be the positive things about being famous? Give me one or two examples.
Validation.
Okay, there'll be lots of validation from people. What else do they think are the positives of being famous?
Open doors.
Okay, open doors and opportunities. What else do they think is the positives of being famous?
Respect.
Yeah, people respect them. Now let's pause for a moment. Now, let's just look at it objectively. What are some of the things that come along with being famous that this person who's attached to fame will not necessarily have thought about properly? Anyone? Think about it. Yeah, right. So sometimes people are famous, they're stalked. Right? So that means wherever you go from now on, there's people watching you, looking to find out something about you. And are they looking to find out positive things about you? No. They're looking to find out negative things about you. And what will they do when they find out something negative about you? They'll spread it, they'll go to the newspapers, I've got a scoop, right? That so-called respectful person, I found out that he or she's doing this. So what people think about when they think about fame, because of attachment, they don't have an objective picture. They see the things that they like about it, but they don't see all the other stuff. And it's because of their attachment. That's what passion does. Ignorance, it means you can't see things in general. Passion is you see things in a skewed way. It's a distortion of what the truth is. What are the other things that people who are attached to fame, they don't always properly see?
Not when they fall, everybody knows.
Okay, yeah, there's no privacy, so anything that you do wrong, when you do something good, it's going to be amplified because you're promoted. But when you do something wrong, everyone's going to know about it. Everyone, right? What else do they miss?
I was thinking of this, sorry. I was thinking of this Biggie song, and more money, more problems.
More problems, yeah. Interesting example. But it's true. It's true. So sometimes famous people want to extort them. Right? I'm going to kidnap your friends or family. We're going to hold you to ransom, like that. And sometimes, even if they haven't done anything wrong, people will go to them and say, "Look, I'm going to put this story out about you unless you pay me." So it's not even a question of them doing something wrong. It's just, I know you've got money. And I know that and I know that you care about your reputation. And I know that if I can actually start some rumors against you, then that could really mess your life up. So even though it's not true, I'm going to come to you and say, I'm going to threaten to say this or this about you unless you pay me. And of course, even if you pay me, what could happen? I can still go and do it. Because now I've got your money, what are you going to do? Seriously. So if I don't like you, not only will I extort money from you, but I'll still go and smear you afterwards anyway. What else?
When they become not famous, somebody else takes over
Yeah.
and lost all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I think that's a great example. Have we seen that sometimes with celebrities, right? So let's look, is there any celebrity who remains famous forever? No. You notice there's an arc, right? So like, it could be a comedian, it could be a boy band. Was it One Direction? One of them passed away, right? So I remember back in the day, there were so many bands like Backstreet Boys, New Kids on the Block, whatever it is, right? So they come up, they come up, but after a certain time, what happens? They disappear. None of these people stay at the top forever. No, none of them. You see, now just think how painful that is. If my whole life, if all my self-worth is because everyone's looking at me, could you imagine what happens to that person when they're no longer the top name or the big name in their particular field? It could be extremely painful, right? No one's looking at you anymore. You're not getting the big contracts because there's a new group, or there's a new comedian, or there's a new actor who's the big name now. And therefore you'll see sometimes famous people, they sometimes try to reinvent themselves to keep the attention, because it's like a drug. I've given away my self-esteem to the public. And no one's told me, because I didn't have spiritual knowledge, I didn't know, take it back. And so instead, I've given my self-esteem to the public, so now I'm constantly needing your attention. And if other people come up, then actually that threatens me. I may even try to sabotage the other person. Because now my self-esteem is all based upon you giving me attention, but no one can hold on to that forever. So it's a very painful position to be in. One more point.
Yeah, there's a quote where it says, when a man sees a beautiful woman, he automatically attributes all good qualities to her.
Yeah.
So in the same way, like fame is like that. A lot of footballers become super famous, but then people naturally think, oh, they must be a good person, they must have integrity, they must be moral. And when they don't live up to that, the world tears them down.
Absolutely. Like, cancel culture can be there. And it's a great point you're making, because sometimes often there's a marketing strategy whereby if you have a famous person, you want to create a mystique around them. And they do that on purpose because it's very lucrative. So if you have a famous person and you create a mystique around them, then it allows the public to project whatever they want onto that person. You see? And then that way, more and more people so-called adore them. But now, like you said, they have to live up to whatever the projections are. And no one's going to be able to do that. Because they're just an ordinary person who happen to have some particular talent. And the moment they don't live up to it, like you said, they get torn down. It can therefore be very, very high pressure to live up to all these expectations of these other 8 billion people, and these expectations you never even signed up for. Very, very powerful point that you're making. So, I think we'll just consider, what is my identity? Just key thing, we're servants of Krishna. There's actually 3 types of self-esteem. The worst is external validation, right? Or external self-esteem, right? Or let's say external value. Higher than that is internal value. I'm inherently valuable. But higher than that is what Krishna consciousness offers, which means eternal value, infinite value. Okay? If we practice Krishna consciousness properly with that understanding, you move from external validation from internal validation through to eternal and infinite validation. Krishna recognizing and loving you as a spirit soul for all eternity. And that is what the teachings of Krishna consciousness gives us. And it's achieved by engaging in what we call nourishing activities. Those nourishing activities are the practices of chanting the holy names of Krishna, hearing about Krishna through the pages of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, and associating with those people who are also on that journey. Because when we associate with each other, we also help to bring about the greatest type of transformation. What we do when we associate with devotees is we experience Krishna's love coming through his own family members, which are the devotees. Thank you very much for your time. Hare Krishna. So we're going to have to run soon, but we'll take one question. And this is something, we'll share the slides, and we want to encourage you. This can be a very important basis for spiritual transformation. Feel free to continue these conversations amongst yourselves as well. But just because we have a little bit of a tight schedule today, although we'll definitely come back and maybe we'll even do part 2, but we'll take one question now.
I want to ask about how would this reflect in the Shikshashtakam, because it says in the third verse that
Great question.
So
Great
how would
question.
that?
Great question. So in the third, so Shikshashtakam is a series of 8 prayers given by Lord Chaitanya. And in the third verse it says, Trinada pisni cheno, Dura pisi hisnuna, amanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. That third verse of Shikshashtakam relates to the stage called Nishta. So Nishta in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who's a great acharya, he wrote a literature called the Madhurya Kadambini. One of the understandings is that Nishta means your devotional service is primarily in the mode of? Anyone? What do you think? If you're a Nishta, your devotional service is primarily in the mode of? Goodness, definitely. Okay? So it's automatically implicit there, because we said that before about goodness. If there's goodness, you're going to deal with yourself properly and you're going to deal with other people properly as well. You see? And therefore, again, what we said before, that humility that's been spoken about there is not low self-esteem. And that humility that's been spoken about there is not the humility whereby one is just being taken advantage of. The humility given by this third verse of Shikshashtakam means I'm tolerant, I'm humble, but humility means, as you said, as Bhakti Gamya said, it means what? What did we say Prabhupada says humility means? Truthfulness. You'll find that in the purport in Bhagavad Gita as it is. So if a devotee is truthful, he or she sees the reality and they act accordingly. Yeah. So, for example, if someone's behavior isn't so good, the devotee sees it with compassion, and if they can't help, then they at least do not allow themselves to be brought down. I'll give you one other point on that. That third verse of Shikshashtakam relates to Nishta. It also relates to the Madhyam Adhikari. The Madhyam Adhikari is the intermediate devotee. And in Nectar of Instruction, the Madhyam Adhikari, they give mercy to the innocent. They always engage in serving the pure devotee. They make friendships with the devotees, and they also do one other thing. They do what? What's the other thing that's mentioned in Nectar of Instruction? They avoid who? They avoid the envious. You see? So this is all part of that same level of spiritual advancement. There's discrimination there. They're avoiding people. This person isn't so favorable. Okay, don't hate them. I'm going to avoid the envious. But the ones who are favorable, I'm going to spend time with them. So it's again humility. Does that make some sense? Thank you for your question. Okay, so we want to say thank you to all of you. It's been a real pleasure to be with you, give a whistle-stop tour on this topic. It's a big topic. I personally feel that in our spiritual communities, if we were able to develop more of the healthy spiritual self-esteem, there'll be less insecurities. And if there were less insecurities, people would not be so much vying for prestige and position, because actually they would understand deep down you're inherently valuable already. So then that would allow is it would allow us to serve with some real detachment from our own fruitive results, because I can do it for Krishna. As Bhakti Gamya said, the real humility is not to think less of yourself, but to think about yourself less. Not to be so absorbed in what I haven't got, what I do have, what I don't have, what that person said, what that person didn't say, are they paying attention to me or not paying attention? I can really focus on Krishna and his servants. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
His Grace Bhavana Prabhu ki
Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai. His Grace Bhakti Gamya Devidasi.
Jai.
So it was a really wonderful session. I definitely think we need part 2. It's actually my fault, because we invite you to Bhavana Prabhu, but it ends up being once a year, so we need to kind of ramp up the frequency, I think. But yeah,